How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it, though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
I'm Jessica Johnson. Some of my most creative endeavors, I like thinking about it in terms of what are the threads? You know, I look at it as like the spider web of what's woven in and woven out and come back in. And music has always been a huge one for me. I have sang since I was probably 6 years old. And my first ditty was actually a little a doot do do a doot do do a doot do 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 do, and I would sing that over and over and over. And Billy Joel was a favorite of mine. And I sang in choirs growing up, and I loved hearing bluegrass and old time music when I got older in life and eventually got into playing guitar. But music has always been a creative thread for me. Also, plants and the natural world. My favorite thing as a kid was collecting treasures, snail shells, snake skins, fish bones, any kind of rocks, being in the forest, being with the plants. That is a huge thread of creativity and always has been for me. And I think, honestly, those are probably two of my most main creative threads.
One thing that's so fun to hear about that is that those are things that you still do and it didn't go away. It was in the essence of you from when you were young.
Yes, very much so. Very much in the essence of who I am. You know, and there are times when I've gotten away from them and it was like, I kind of had to go do something else, but I'll take little pieces with me. I mean, I've got them all here. I've got my rock here. I've got my acorn cap here. I've got my mushroom here. Got little plants all over here. But I knew I had to go do something different in life for a while. You know, you kind of get called down these different paths. And I would literally say, I have to leave you for a little while, but I'll be back. And it's something I would always come back to.
You're talking about singing. I love your singing voice very much. And when did guitar come along? Why guitar?
When I was living in Lawrence, Kansas, I was dating a man who was a fabulous flat picking guitar player. And so I was really lucky because he played with all kinds of amazing musicians and they would all come over to my living room and I would just make them as much food as they wanted so that they would stay as long as they would and play and play and play because I just loved it. I always had the ear for the music and I had the voice and the singing. But then I realized, well, I wanted my own instrument that I could just play along with my voice. I didn't want to have to rely on somebody else playing the instrument for me. And not that a voice always needs another instrument to go with it, but I wanted that, you know, I wanted some kind of rhythm. And so guitar is a fairly simple one in my head to just pick up and learn a few chords. And so that's what I thought I would do because it was really always about supporting my voice to me. It wasn't, I'm going to go learn how to play the guitar. It was, I'm going to learn a few chords so that I can sing and play the guitar with my singing. And that's exactly what I did. I learned 3 chords. Luckily, that's all you need, especially in old time music, at least in the beginning. Ended up moving out to Colorado and was at a festival there and saw my first Appalachian old time band. You know, it was the first time I had seen and heard Appalachian music. And I just was like, I mean, it was like my whole world stopped. And I was like, what is that? Because that is in me, literally in me. And now in retrospect, I know it's because I grew up in the Ozarks and I have the Ozark land music because there's a flavor of Ozark old time music And Appalachian is its own, like, you know, to be honored as its own thing. And but in hearing it, it was so similar, to the Ozark music. And I think the land that I had grown up in, that it was like, it was the land calling me home in a way. Anyway, that night I was playing and singing at this campfire at the festival. And one of the people who had been playing up on stage came around the campsite and said, "Hey, I really like your voice. Can I sit here and play with you?" And that's how, this whole journey into Appalachian music and kind of rerouting into the Ozark tradition started for me. Next thing I knew, I was being asked, "Hey, do you want to record on this album? And do you want to go on the road and do this stuff?" And I was like, "I only know 3 chords, guitar." But again, that was really all I needed. So I was kind of, put into this whole world of performing that I really didn't know what it was about or if I even wanted to do it. But I was at a point in my life where I just said, what the heck, I'll give it a try. And I did. And it really wasn't for me because I didn't like eating gas station food and living on a bus. So luckily, I was able to go then move into Asheville in the Appalachian region for a few years. And that was the best immersion into the land and the music for me. Then I learned I probably know 5 or 6 chords now.
I think probably 7 at least.
Maybe, yeah. And, for people who have that thread in their lives, it is a true thread. Like me getting into that music, I started, of course, telling my parents. My parents would come see some of the shows. And my mom then revealed to me that her grandfather used to build fiddles, and he had built 5 fiddles, 2 parlor-sized guitars, an upright or a cello. He made a cello for my mom's mother, I believe. And I was like, no kidding. Well, where are all of these instruments? And she said, well, I have 5 brothers. And when my mom died, because her mom died when she was very young, I have 5 brothers and they really all wanted all of them. So they've all got parsed out and I'm sure they're just sitting in attics. And I said, well, that's the worst place for instruments to be sitting. So she contacted her brothers and told them that I was playing this style of music. And one of them found one of the old fiddles that was in good enough shape. I didn't know any of this at the time. And she had it restored. It had to all be taken apart, soaked in water, put back together again. And when they opened up this fiddle, my great-grandfather had signed it on the inside, E.L. Elijah McMurtry, 1930, Risen, Arkansas. And so it was this music of that land, coming back into my life through this fiddle that I now have and play. And wow, what a beautiful thread,
What did you do when she handed you that fiddle?
Well, she gave it to me for Christmas and she wrote me a story about it. And, so when I opened the case, there was a piece of paper that said the story of this fiddle. And I just cried. It's still the coolest thing that I own.
Well, it makes me think 2 things. One is what a thoughtful mama. And the other is a lot of people have stories. It could be something different than music, but where something's kind of calling them and it feels like something outside of you, or I don't know, it sounds woo-woo to say there's some voice, or maybe it's your higher self. Who knows how you want to explain it, but there's something in us from our past that's still in us. And like you're saying, you call it a thread. Mm-hmm. And when we feel that little, inkling or feeling about something like that, instead of questioning why it's there, we should maybe just go for it because there's something that feels really, really good to us in it. And there's a reason why.
Yes, absolutely. And staying alive to those sparks and, being able to receive those sparks as they come through. I certainly haven't been able to follow each and every one, but I'm grateful that I've been able to follow a good few of them.
You're talking about your nature collections and love of nature. When did it transition into more of a career side of things where you're like, I'm going to go study this more. I'm going to maybe make my livelihood from this and fold it in with all the rest?
Those beautiful Appalachian mountains really called me in very deep to them in my time there. And I studied with quite a few herbalists, Juliet Blancaspor and Corey Pine Shane and Sarah Foley, who are just some of the most wonderful people that I've gotten a chance to study with. Juliet Blancaspor now has a wonderful online school, Chestnut School of Herbalism. But back then, it was before she had this. And we just would go to her house and grow, she was growing all kinds of plant medicines in her garden. All kinds. And so we would go and help her make medicines out of them. That was part of this apprenticeship with her. And then another day of the week, we'd go out into the woods somewhere along the Blue Ridge Parkway or Smokies or wherever. And she would walk us through the woods and tell us all the things, botany, science-y, all the things, fairies and spiritual wise. She just gave us this very well-rounded approach. And it was the first time I just had this new way of seeing the forest and the plants. I was hooked. And the fact that I knew plant was medicine, but now I knew how to make the medicines. I knew more about which plant did what. So when I got pregnant with Lyle, who's my 3.5-year-old son now, I ironically had just started working at a fertility clinic. I was like, wow, the water really works here. When I was pregnant with him, it was physically hard for me. I had an itchy skin. It would keep me up all night long. It was horrible. So I had to quit my job, like 3 months into this job. And for me, pregnancy was some sleep deprivation, but it was also a really beautiful creative time. And I know a lot of women have that experience. And so I decided, well, I'm going to be starting to make these medicines for my kid. So I started growing the plants. I started making salves and balms out of the plants I was growing. And that's when I just started selling that stuff because I had the time on my hands. I knew I was going to be making these things anyway for myself and my family. So it was a time that I could start to share them with the world.
Another thing that strikes me is you have a doctor in your family, and there's this thing that I see in you, which is you want to not just keep it for yourself. Like you want to be part of a healing process for someone, just be part of that. Like you have a sharingness about it. What are your thoughts about not one person heals us, but taking some of that and being part of a healing process for someone?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that you see that in me. I see that and feel that in me too. It is a special thing. And it's, it's almost like sometimes when I learned how healing processes for myself, I almost too quickly turned around to give them away, before like, no, just stay with it for yourself for a little bit longer. But I really believe in group healing and rebound healing too. So I think that's one of the reasons why if I have found something that works, the way for it to even help me even further is to be in community with it, and being in community helps people to start thinking of new ways of being, because that's, we're so influenced by community and culture. And so I'm not shy I'm shy on stage and I am but I'm not shy about sharing knowledge I'm really excited about, like what feels like truth in a particular moment. It may change, but truth in a particular moment, I get really excited about it. And I do want to share it. That has definitely been part of my healing path, is to, I've found this magic potion, so to speak. And that's one thing I did as a little kid too. I would always be concocting magical potions with things. So I want to share this magic potion. And if it's working for other people, then they're going to figure out new things that are also then going to come back to me. And it's just this process of it's rebound healing. I help you here, and then you find this new light in your life, and that gets reflected back at me and brings me to even a different level. And that's one of the coolest experiences I've had with healing and healing with others.
Instead of the ego of I'm a healer, you're saying we heal back and forth with each other all the time and everybody's part of it. I love that idea. One thing you've shared about is the importance of gut reset. I was curious if you would just speak about why it's important in your mind, and if you had a few things you could recommend people could try.
One of the reasons it's important in my mind is there's so many ways that inflammation can kind of dig its way into our bodies. We all know the reasons. There's different stressors. There may be something very emotional, loss of a loved one that's happened. It can be certain foods, but most often, and I have found in my experience in myself and in, kind of this interaction with others, is that it's not necessarily the food that is causing something, but it is the food that can trigger some of the symptoms and the inflammation. Certain foods that will create those triggers more than other foods. Certainly things like processed foods, which I will tell you, I do not consider food. Processed food doesn't make it into my definition of food. So I'm taking that stuff off the table. But, in the overconsumption of sugar and dairy, and depending on if people are eating too much meat, sometimes that can be a trigger. And gluten, they're more triggering. And especially if our body is already in a tender state, which if you're a human, you will be in tender states of life. They happen seasonally, they happen in cycles, they happen in phases, however you want to say it. We all go through these things of life. So for me, the gut reset is really about saying, I'm going to figure out which foods are creating some triggers and some symptoms right now. I'm going to crowd those out by bringing in these other things that are nourishing me more right now. And once I am nourished, my cells are more nourished. They have more strength and energy and vitality, so that it's less mind over matter. It's less about, okay, I'm not going to eat this cake today, or I'm not going to eat this thing. It's that my body and my cells have been nourished, that my body has its own intelligence, that it's not craving those things that are causing some of those triggers and those symptoms to go off. Then when I do bring those foods back in, because I do always try to bring foods back in, it's never for me about let's cut this out and stop eating it forever. Always about bringing things back in at the right and appropriate times. Then my body can handle it. And I'm so happy, because who isn't happy to have a little cheesecake every once in a while or whatever it is, that social part of eating, to be there and just be able to be okay with having the glutinous quiche or whatever it is on the table. So it's important to do both, in my opinion. It's important to let yourself be in a place where you can allow your body these things. And I think a really smart way to do that is to let your body grow its intelligence through nourishing with the most nourishing foods for a while, by crowding out the ones that aren't nourishing it.
And then it tastes even better. That's so true. Going with the flow of the waves of life. And we don't need to be dogmatic. We don't need to be one way all the time, but we should acknowledge that we have healing times and we have feasting times and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And food is a part of those cycles too. Yep, absolutely.
Tell us a little more about Lila herbs.
This is a neat story. I got pregnant decades ago now, and I called my mom and I told her I was pregnant, and I said, and lilacs are one of my favorite flowers. And I said to her, Mom, if it's a girl, I'm going to name her Lila after lilacs. And I had never heard of anybody with the name Lila back then. Now, of course, I know many Lilas in my life, but my mom was just dead silent on the other end of the phone. And I was like, are you there? And she said, Jessica, Lila was my mother's name. And I didn't know that because, as I'd mentioned previously, my mom's mom, Lila, died when she was 12. And she's just never really talked to me much about her and her family. So I was like, wow, Lila McMurtry is my grandmother. And I had a miscarriage with that pregnancy. And my partner and I, at the time, we were living in Boulder, Colorado, and we went to go hike up this little trail in the foothills to do a little ceremony for the departing of the spirit. We got to the trailhead and there were some big rock steps at the beginning. And there was a man there with his daughter who was probably about 4 or 5. And we went to pass them. And this man looked down at his little daughter and he said, Lila, do you need help going up the stairs, or can you do it by yourself?
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, and my partner and I at the time, our jaws just went wide and we were just speechless, silent the whole time until we got to this little spot. I realized that I had a little spirit in my life. I have a Lila spirit in my life. And actually, she's my grandmother. And how neat, because I never have met her physically. And well, I'd really never had an experience like that before with, perhaps you could say the spirit world or, the ancestral world. So I decided that's how I was going to look at it, and feel it and interact with it and be in relationship with Lila. When she died of breast cancer, and she lived in Stuttgart, Arkansas, which is a big rice and soy producing area of Arkansas, very rural. And, that was an area where they would do the flyover planes of chemicals and pesticides for the fields. So, it's a very strong theory that she likely died of some of the toxins from those chemicals. When I was making the Lila herbal products, I grew them all pesticide free. And so it was in her honor that I made these plant medicines, pesticide free. And it was a no-brainer that it was going to be called Lila Herbals, because she had become this beautiful thread in my life. And I was pregnant, as I said, when this creation was going on. My son is named after her. His name is Lyle. And so Lyle, Lila, Lilac, they all go together.
What a story. You have an Etsy shop. I do want to mention that, so people should check it out. You have salves, you're offering so many great things. Somebody might go see that and, oh, it's a business name. It is not a business name only to you.
No.
There's so much behind it. What a story. So gardening is another thing you love, one of your loves. I've been hearing about your successful December broccolis.
Thank you very much.
Bravo. And tell us some tips and tricks that you've used.
Okay, this is how I did it. So I currently live in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And, if you haven't been to Arkansas, we do have winter. It gets cold, and we've had a little bit of a snow. So it's not like it's just, the South warm weather all the time, but of course it is warmer than maybe say Colorado. But I figured out that fall, winter gardening is the best here, because summertime we have so many bugs that they eat everything. And so I decided, well, I'm going to really become a fall and winter gardener and plant all those things. So I did grow a spring/summer batch of broccoli, and it was beautiful. And when I harvested it, it had little moth worms in it to the degree that I could not eat it. I was so sad. So the fall winter thing was like, first of all, I covered up all the little soil patches with remake cloth so that they wouldn't get burned from the cold nights. But before I planted everything in the ground, I have a little worm compost bin. I started that worm compost bin with my little son when he was probably 2, and kept that thing going for 2 years. I mean, it's still going. So I had worm poop that when I transplanted my little baby broccoli into the ground, I put little scoops in, and I had been growing outdoor compost in my backyard that was, my soil that I was putting it into. So that's all it needed was worm poop and my backyard compost. I have chickens too. So my compost had a lot of composted chicken manure. Those babies just grew. I threw a little cloth over them and I waited. I waited and I waited and I waited. It got down to 17 degrees one night a couple weeks ago. So I decided that was the time I had to go harvest them all. And I harvested about 8 heads of beautiful broccoli. Y'all, that worm poop, just a little tiny worm compost bin. That's the magic.
I'm realizing that not everybody really knows the details of that. You actually have a bin. Is it in your house? And there are worms in it. And then you put your scraps in it, right?
Yeah. Just like a little Rubbermaid, literally it's probably like this long and this wide, a little plastic Rubbermaid bin. And I drilled some holes in the top of it, put some mesh there so there can't be too many escapees out those little holes, and got online and ordered red wigglers, which is really fun. And you kind of want to be there the day that they're delivered, and you get your little bag of worms delivered at your doorstep, and you just put some dirt and some newspaper into the bin and make sure that they stay moist, and then start putting in little food scraps and feeding them.
I love it. What has been one of your biggest struggles when it comes to staying on your creative path?
I think it's two pieces that come to my mind right away are trust and faith that it will return. Because sometimes I deliberately go off that path. I choose to leave sometimes. That's just my personality. I choose to take the long road, the long way around. I have always been that way. And what my probably subconscious thinking around it is that I'm going to go into this really messy, dirty place. It's not going to feel good probably for a while, but eventually I'm going to emerge, and it's going to have been kind of this alchemical situation where all that dirt has turned into some little nugget of gold. But sometimes it takes longer, than I'm hoping it will to return to that creative path. And so I get scared, and the fear is, oh, what if it doesn't return? What if I don't get back? If I start to lose the trust and the faith in that process, that's really scary for me. But having the little reminders sitting around bring me back into that faith and that trust often.
What is filling up your inspiration cup these days?
Well, Lyle comes to my mind. For me, it's so fun to get to be a kid all over again. And right now I'm 3.5 and I'm playing with a lot of Legos and we have watercolors. So I was like, how can we not bring more Lego pieces in, but create new sets from what we already have? So we brought watercolors in and painted little pictures of all these vegetables and fruits and fruit bushes, and then stuck them with tape to the Lego pieces that we already have. So we could turn, like a car wash Lego theme into a garden Lego theme through our little cutout watercolor pieces, and not have to then just have a lot more Legos. I'm not against having more Legos. I know it's going to happen at some point. I also will say, in the journey of motherhood, I'm at that point where there's more space that's being allowed between my son and I. It's just part of a natural progression. It's not necessarily, I need more space, although believe me, I get there. Having been so close in with this human for so long and just really focused on that, and then getting the first light coming in of exploration, re-exploration into the world of healing that I so love. It's just absolutely amazing to step back into the work of the healing work and getting to be with clients, because I do functional nutrition and I do Arvigo abdominal and uterine pelvic therapy. And so now I'm getting to see people again in that place. And I have knowledge with it as a mother now, which is a huge toolbox of knowledge, huge. So there's a lot of inspiration there, having been in this cocoon with my son and now being able to be revived and remember who I am and having a little bit more space of that. I will tell you that it's people like you who are inspiring to me. It's this remembering of who I have been in former lives, not just my motherhood, but, remember I was in a band with Annie Fain and we played music and what's she up to, And, look at her artwork. I'm going to order some of that artwork, and I have your things. I have your artwork on my walls. I just ordered one of your new pieces to put in my new healing clinic space. That's what I love. That inspires me. I have all these magical pieces and friends and lands that I have journeyed to that are enchanted, the enchantment pieces of my life, and bringing those in.
We're rebound inspiring.
Yes.
Do you have any last words of encouragement for anyone out there just trying hard to, keep that creative spark alive?
Restart. If things don't seem to be going well and they're just not working at all, shut it down and restart. It might seem like, oh, dang it, I've got to be at the very beginning again. But I have found in my experience so far that It may feel like I'm at the beginning for the first little while, but then all of a sudden, all the knowledge I've gained and the wisdom that has become a part of me starts to seep back in again. I just had to push the restart button and allow myself to go there.
If you would like to be in touch, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. I also hope that you're inspired to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards from my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. When you do, you get a coupon for 10% off a one-time purchase in my Etsy shop and first dibs on my annual limited edition calendar printing. You will also be granted access to our free private Facebook group, which is the one spot you can watch these interviews. If this all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/FainHouse to sign up. This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. You can find this link, as well as links for each person I interview, in the show notes of each episode. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. Making the simple complex is commonplace. Making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creativity. Charles Mingus.